Infrastructure is one of those things that we very, very easily take for granted. Whenever I think of infrastructure, I always think of houses. And let's say that you were looking to buy a house and you go and look at a few different houses. When you talk to people about the houses you go to look at, you're going to talk about kind of the fun stuff. So you're going to talk about the kitchen or the bathrooms that they have, or maybe there's a nice yard or a finished basement or something like that. Like those are the fun things that you will remember and think about and most likely be looking for when you're, say, looking for a new house or new home. Those things are definitely important and they're very fun and you get a lot of joy out of those things every day. But I would argue that the more important parts of a home or of a house are the infrastructure that make it all work. That's things like the plumbing, the electrical, the drainage system of the house. Does it flood? How's the roof? Is the roof in good shape? What's the neighborhood like? These are all the things that are incredibly important for a functioning home or a functioning house. But again, when we're looking for something new and we're talking about say the house or the home to a friend or family, we don't focus on that stuff. We don't say, oh man, the pipes were killer. And that's kind of normal, because infrastructure, especially in developed countries, is just kind of taken for granted. We expect to have clean running water. We expect that when we flick a light switch, the light goes on. We expect that we can turn the heat on to warm us up in the wintertime, and we expect that we can turn the air conditioner on or a fan on when we're getting a little too hot. And I think it's normal to expect that stuff in kind of everyday life. And again, you know, you're not going to appreciate those things until they're gone or until they're broken. Now, when it comes to being an indie developer or kind of owning your own business and starting out, I think there's a deep connection between infrastructure and the ways I just laid out. So as I continue to keep working on this custom buckets feature, I am definitely learning that this is much more of a infrastructure project than I had anticipated. Buckets are, you know, what I currently call data types. So the movies, books, video games, those types of things within the app. Being able to now allow people to create any type of data type. So they could add restaurants or locations or vacation spots or comic books or all types of stuff. Basically anything you can think of. Making that change sounds very simple. You just, you know, from a UI perspective, it's actually pretty straightforward. And I actually have most of that built out already. But as I'm diving into making this work throughout the app, specifically I'm working on integrating custom buckets into the activities section where you can see stats, you can filter activity based on certain buckets, and all that kind of stuff. These data types and buckets are so integrated within the app that this is well beyond just a simple new feature that's mostly UI. It's actually a ton of infrastructure work. When I first dove into this, I did know it was infrastructure work or some infrastructure work. I just didn't anticipate how much it was going to be. I think it's fine. There's nothing wrong with infrastructure work. And I think a lot of times that kind of work gets put off because it's hard to do. It takes much more time than maybe you even think it's going to take. And it's not, you don't really see a lot of that work either. Like it's not from a user facing perspective. You don't really see that infrastructure. To be honest with you, you have to do that work. Like you can't put it off indefinitely. At some point, you're going to have to do that type of work. This infrastructure work that I'm doing for these custom buckets, I really think it's worth it because it's going to enable a lot more flexibility within Sofa itself. And it's actually going to enable other features that I kind of can't do right now because this ability just doesn't exist. So it's definitely taking longer than I thought, but I think that's fine. That's what needs to be done. Now, if you want to be an indie app developer, you need to start thinking about your infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure that you need to be able to do this in a sustainable way for a long time? Now, if you're looking to be an indie app developer, there is some fundamental infrastructure you are going to need. Number one is setting yourself up as a business, something like an LLC, and having a separate business bank account. If you plan on making money from your apps, even if you don't plan on going full time, even if you just want it to be something on the side, you do need to treat it as a business because you are going to be asking for money from customers. And since it's a business, it's going to require the kind of legal setup and infrastructure, something like an LLC. And you're going to need to have your own business bank account that you are keeping separate from your personal finances. Second thing is you're going to need to have the skills to actually do this or the interest to learn those skills. Now, for myself, I went to school for graphic design, and then I started to get into UI design and software design. And then I later learned how to do iOS development because I really wanted to do this. So I didn't have the skills at the time, but I invested the time to learn those skills. And again, that's kind of a fundamental thing. Like, do you have the skills to do this thing? And the last thing is equipment. Right? You need some kind of computer. If you're going to do iOS development, you need, a Mac of some kind. But even if you're doing web development, you just need a computer. It can be a laptop, desktop, whatever you need, but you need one to be able to do this. So those are kind of the fundamental bits of the infrastructure that you need, but there's a few more things that I think are really, really important to consider. First, do you have time to do this? Do you have time to work on your app, to think about your app and really push it forward over a long period of time? This is a very hard thing to do, because most people have full-time jobs, they have families, they have kids, they have other obligations that they need to attend to. And finding time in your week to design, develop, and market and ship out your app over a long period of time is very difficult. I just recently went full-time, but for the past 8 years, I did 2 work nights a week. So every Monday and every Wednesday was dedicated to working specifically on Sofa. So I knew that every week, on Mondays and Wednesdays, I had, say, 4 to 5 hours after work and after dinner to be able to focus exclusively on building the app. And that was enough time to make significant progress and to get to the point where I could go full-time, but it took a long time to get there. Next is, do you have support from your friends, family, partner, spouse, whatever? Doing this over a long period of time is not easy, and there's moments where you feel like you're kind of just wasting your time and you're not really making any progress. If I didn't have the emotional support from my wife, from friends, and from family to keep going, and to know that I wasn't just wasting hours and hours and hours every week, it would have been way more difficult to be able to push through those hard times. So really look at your relationships in your everyday life. Are those strong, and do you have that support to be able to kind of push through? Because you're going to have moments where the inspiration hits pretty hard, and you'll be able to kind of coast through pretty easy. But there's going to be many moments where you just hit gaps. Like maybe your day job is just burning you out. Maybe you're just too busy in general with life. And there's weeks at a time where you can't do any work on the side. And having the support from the people around you is super important. So the last thing is around healthy finances. Do you have a lot of debt? Do you have a healthy savings? Luckily for us app developers, the cost for getting up and running are, all things considered, pretty low. You really just need a computer of some kind and then really access to the internet. So costs are pretty low at the beginning, and I would stress to keep them as low as possible for as long as you can. Definitely don't go into debt to do something like this. For most of the past 8 years, I built Sofa on a refurbished MacBook Air. Now, I definitely wanted a higher end MacBook Pro with tons of storage and all that stuff, but it just wasn't financially viable at that point, and I really just needed something to be able to start building with. And then in making the decision to go full-time, me and my wife really looked hard at our finances to make sure that we didn't have any debt, that we had enough savings to be able to do something like this, because, it is a calculated risk, and we didn't want to be carrying over all of this burden with us if we weren't financially ready. So take a good look at your finances and make sure that you are in a good place to be able to do something like this. Now, gang, this is always a good moment and a good feeling, because after a day and a half of grinding through some tedious work and updating stuff, things are finally starting to work. So now, custom buckets, you can load custom buckets in activity. So as you can see, there's hikes, restaurants, along with all your normal stuff, movies, TV shows. We got stats working. So you can see hikes here, restaurants. And we got filtering working too. Boom. It's the little things. So the activity section, when it comes to the data types and the custom buckets, is definitely the more complicated part of the app because, as you can see, there are stats that I'm calculating. You can filter activity by the various buckets / data types, that kind of stuff. Now the custom ones are working, so that's good. And it's very, got that nice dopamine hit from actually seeing the UI come together after that little bit of grind. So my next step is I'm going to start moving through the rest of the parts of the app. So list, the pile, and the shelf to make sure that custom items are working as expected. Once that's done, I'm going to dive back into the custom buckets UI, so how you essentially create those, how you create manual items so that I can make this a little bit more rich so you can add images to them and all that kind of stuff. I could talk about infrastructure for a really long time. In my previous job, I did a lot of work with design systems, which kind of made me dive deep into this topic, and it's something that I fell in love with. It made me realize that infrastructure is always there, even if you don't realize it's there, and even if you don't appreciate it's there. And the absence of it can be very painful. So I hope this is helpful if you're, someone who is aspiring to be an indie developer, whether that's part-time or full-time. Hopefully this context of infrastructure and this idea of infrastructure kind of resonates with you and hits home, because I think it's an underappreciated fact of the work that we do. We focus a lot, or I would say too much focus is put on the code that is written or the UI that is created and all those kind of fun, visible things like the kitchen in a house, right? Or the nice bathroom or the big yard. I think that infrastructure is way more important and underappreciated as a concept, and something that we should all look at a lot more deeply before we dive into big jobs. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.